Good morning, everybody. It is August 16th, and this is another episode of Conscious Conversations. If you would, grab coffee, grab water, do what you need to do, and we're going to get started in just a few minutes. Of course, today we are having the discussion around enough, and we'll get there in just one moment. Let me just make sure that we are on all of the proper channels. Go ahead and say good morning for me, please. Put it in the comment section so that I can see who is with us. That way we can be ready to go. Good morning, good morning. Good morning, everybody. So having the discussion around enough, of course, this is something that we've talked about in the past. It kind of has a wonderful bleed in from our discussion yesterday. But really, kind of understanding in my personal world, for many of the topics that we talk about, of course, it is always open. Please submit questions or comments or topics that you would like to see us discuss. You can send that to team@michaelreedy.org. Of which we can definitely be able to filter through that and make sure that we are casting episodes around this. Sometimes these episodes come from discussions that I'm having with coaching clients, with discussions during masterminds, things that come about. Sometimes they are things that I am writing about, either topics I'm writing about from a blog perspective or things that are in my book, as well as even personal things that are going on in my world. Sometimes I will say that I'm really talking to myself, and to ensure that I don't look completely crazy, I go live just so that there's someone else on the other side of it. But this past weekend, Doug and I went out to dinner, and there's always that feeling that can kind of happen at the end of a meal. Especially if you overindulge. When you eat until you're content and you feel great, you eat beyond that and you're miserable. Same concept in terms of drinking, alcohol. You drink to celebrate and unwind, and it's wonderful. If you drink beyond that, it can get to the point where you wake up the next day hungover and potentially full of regret. From work, you can work and find work that is fulfilling, and the old adage of if you find something that's fulfilling, you'll never work a day in your life. Yet if you work beyond that, you can become its prisoner. There's this myth of more that I refer to as the sermon of more, the sermon of doing, that we see on social media and all of these other things that are going on, which quite frankly is one of the leading causes of modern day suffering. But what's fascinating about it is that it's not anything new. If we go back and if you might be familiar with a gentleman and or kind of mythical collection of multiple Stoics from early Chinese history. Lao Tzu, Lao Tzu is actually this little guy that you might have seen on previous episodes, which is just a good reminder for me to kind of keep some of his philosophies. And I'm going to refer to him as the singular because from a historical perspective, they don't know if it is one person or if it's kind of a collection of multiple philosophers and Stoics, mystics from early Chinese. I mean, we're talking about the Tao Te Ching being written somewhere between the 4th and 6th century BCE, right? So very, very long time ago, this idea that what we're talking about of chasing work or chasing fame, chasing money is actually not a new idea at all, right? These are things that we hear about in the Bible. We hear about them in the Quran. We hear about them in the Tao Te Ching. I mean, we hear them in Buddhist texts, right? They have been around for thousands of years. And yet it seems like it is perpetuated even more from the non-stop, everybody is an influencer, everybody is a millionaire, everybody is selling tons of things, and you can too. And so, one of the things that I think is very fascinating about this is that Lao Tzu in the 9th verse of the Tao Te Ching, had this to say, which is very similar to this concept, right? You fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening the knife, and it will be blunt. Chase after money and security, and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval, and you will be their prisoner. Do your work, then step back. That is the only path to serenity. which I think is very fascinating to have this conversation. Of course, I'm a coach. In often cases, I'm a productivity coach, helping people do more than they've done last year to make more than they've ever made. Yet, we always have to make sure that we have a clear understanding of why we're doing what we're doing and making sure that we don't veer too far away from some of those standards that we're setting for ourselves. So good morning. Let's see who's here. Good morning, Casey. It's so good to see you. I think we had a belated birthday from me. Your birthday, I think, was a week or so ago. So happy birthday, Casey. Good morning, Trisha. Good morning, Kelly. Good morning, Shantae. Good morning, Jason, who was up early in California. So understanding, I have been writing this quite a bit in the book that I'm working on, in this idea of that our society has moved away from human beings to human doings. I mean, really, since the Industrial Revolution, we have been compared to machines and computers, and quite frankly, so many people have been fearing that they're going to be replaced by computers or by machines, right? And what's fascinating about this idea of machines is that they work nonstop, right? You think about an engine that can just go and go and go. It's summertime, so if you think about your AC unit, that can just go, 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 right? It's a very linear idea that if I do this plus this equals this, right? And even our institutions, the institutions of politics, of government, of economics, of education, are built on this idea of a linear concept. But you and I are not linear. We are as much a part of nature as anything else. We are human beings. There is that being element that we talked about last week, and that we've talked about, quite frankly, over a lot of these conscious conversations, which is an understanding that your life is codependent. We are interrelated. We are independent in certain elements, but we are so dependent upon the idea and identity that we have with others. Again, kind of going back to, there is someone, and I just want to hug them. There are these people on social media that have created a certain level of fame, that are perpetuating this narrative of being a lone wolf and doing it alone, and it's just me and my partner and F the rest of the world. And first of all, I want to know who hurt you. And then secondly, that's such a horrible way to move through life. We are a community-based species. Also, from the perspective, if you take it a little bit further, right, that high-performance hippie element that I have going on is that idea that we are interconnected because we are coming from that same place. We are coming from that same thing. We are made up of the same concepts. And so when we can look at one another as being the reflection of ourselves, we can see that we're not in this alone. We can see that it is community. It is as much you on the other side of the camera as it is me being here this morning. And so understanding that is also an understanding of nature, the idea that there is a natural ebb and flow, right? There is tide goes up and tide goes back. There's a time for us to be ahead and a time for us to be behind, a time for us to grind and a time for us to rest. And so, it really is a very fascinating thing that we're not linear. Again, that kind of concept of you go to school, and after you go to school, you make it until you're 18, then you go to college potentially, or you go immediately into the workforce. Once you get into the workforce, you find a job. Once you get that job, you start paying for goods and services, right? Stuff, and then you pay for the place to store stuff, houses and storage. Then the next thing is supposedly you're supposed to find a partner, right? And then you're supposed to come together. From there, you put your stuff together and you put your houses together. So that idea of we get more stuff and we get bigger places to put our stuff. And then after that, we might get a better job, which means that we can afford higher quality stuff and higher quality places to store our stuff. And then potentially you build a family, and as you build that family, you build more accumulation of stuff, and you got to have bigger places to store that stuff. And so when is the conversation around enough? And have you determined for yourself what enough looks like? Now, this doesn't necessarily just have to do with money or belongings. This can have to do with, on a daily basis. What is enough? When do I turn in? When is my work done for the day? What are the things that I'm doing to determine what's enough? And so I'm curious for you, have you identified what enough is? And then, quite frankly, how do you stay in this space of being content with what you have while still pursuing the idea of achieving more? So I'm curious, with this topic, what are your own thoughts, or what are you currently dealing with? I think a lot of us can contribute to this topic of understanding this idea of the perpetual chasing of more, as well as also an understanding of where we are. So let's see, what are some answers that we have here. Good morning, Isaiah. Good morning, Yvette. We're going to give you a minute to go ahead and respond. There's a joke that I have with Shantae, in which we discuss some of the things that are going on around topics of my last name being Reedy, and then jokingly an alter ego that is constantly kind of chasing more, or that growth is greedy. And so looking at it, it's really making sure that you're checking in with yourself, because if you do not have a clear definition of what enough is for you, you might find yourself getting caught up in the whirlwind that is consumerism. Right? Good morning, Stephen. So, this is really where having that understanding of what are the conversations that you're having, the things that you're doing, what's going on in your world, so that you can determine some of these topics, right, around what is enough, and determining what are some of those things that are there for you. So this is kind of a good segue into the topics of understanding contentment versus complacency, right? Contentment is, I know exactly where I am. When we talk about the idea of, if you find yourself looking at the money that you have in your account, or the house that you're in, or your current situation, and you find yourself depressed, then what you're doing is you are focusing on the past, right? It's that fear of saying, man, I wish that I had more, or I should have had more in the bank account by now, or I should have made better choices, or once this thing happens, once I make $150,000 or $1 million, or whatever that amount is for you, then I will be happy, right? I just have to grind and suffer through all of this until that moment. And then once that moment happens, then I'll be happy. That is kind of that idea of being depressed, of the choices that you've made in the past that have led to where you are currently. That's that level of suffering. If you find yourself looking at your bank account, or your belongings, or the accumulation of things that you have, and you're fearful that you're going to lose it all, that somehow it was a fluke, that your success was an anomaly, and that it's all going to fall apart, then you are suffering the future. You're suffering anxiety. That idea that this thing that I have, right? Again, going back to Lao Tzu talking about, if you fill your halls with jade and gold, then you're not going to be able to hang on to it for long. Because before, then there's the constant worry of thievery or betrayal, or someone taking these things away from you because you're attached to that belonging. But if you find yourself in the present moment, looking at where you are, looking at what's in your bank account, looking at some of the things that are there, not necessarily saying that you're completely satisfied, but saying, I am grateful for where I am, and I am happy with the things that are going on in my world. And I'm going to continue to move forward and aspire to, hit my full potential. But I am rooted in that gratitude of the things that are around me. Then you are in the present. And this concept is one of those that I think is very interesting, to find that balance of how can I be grateful and content in the present while still actively pursuing this idea of more and or better, right? And so for more for the sake of more, or that more is better, right? i.e. the golden corral, doesn't always necessarily mean better, like the Golden Corral. So really looking at these ideas of, have you clearly defined what enough means for you, what it means from a career perspective, what it means from a financial perspective, what it means for an accumulation of wealth, what it means for time that you are spending, because there's an understanding that no matter what we're doing, there is always going to be an exchange, right? There is that idea that when you say yes to something, you are saying no to a whole lot of other things, right? If I choose to do an activity, then I'm choosing not to do a whole bunch of other activities. So making sure that we understand that that pursuit of more for work, right? And I think one of the most interesting elements of this is the idea of the narrative that we have in society, especially Western society, that men are supposed to provide. And thankfully, that narrative is being changed. But that idea that the head of the household, or that the breadwinner, has to go out and do all of these things and never be home so that they can provide for, the designer clothes and the brand new shoes. Or we've got back to school happening for many of you this week and or last week. And that idea that your children have to be in certain clothes, or look a certain way, or have a certain book bag, or do certain things in order for that to be the definition of success. And what we find is that person spends all of their time working. They never spend any time with their family, telling themselves a narrative that they're doing all of this for their family, to provide for their family. And then they find themselves later in life, their children are off and independent. They don't come back, they don't visit, they don't call. That person has neglected their spouse, partner, significant other for 20 plus years. They don't even know their spouse, partner, significant other. Now they find themselves, middle-aged or beyond middle-aged, alone, in isolation, and then now just resentful and carrying animosity. All because they were chasing this idea of more, as opposed to asking themselves, what is enough that is a fair trade-off for what I'm willing to exchange for what's going on? So I'd love to hear some thoughts that you have going on around this topic, right? Let's see. Trisha says, I don't know that I've ever defined what enough is. I definitely feel like I have enough stuff, right? And there is something, in our world, Doug and I, we purge probably every 3 years. We just try to get rid of things, or we really do an evaluation of, do we need all of these things, all of these stuff? Because, what's interesting is that you might own stuff, but after a while, the stuff you own owns you, right? If I was to offer you, hey, let's go for 3 months to Thailand. You go, oh, I can't. I've got a mortgage, and I've got multiple car payments, and, I've got all of these animals and all of this stuff, and all of a sudden you find yourself going, well, wait a minute, that stuff that you own owns you. So really looking at the things that are around you and going, you might say, I have no interest in going to Thailand, and absolutely, but you can understand the concept that is this idea of a trap. I was reading, I'm a big fan of Anthony Bourdain. I love reading his stuff, and he had talked about having a conversation with Emerald. And, at first he was very naive to this concept, and he was like, when are you done, right? Like, you got the cookware, you got the TV show, you got the restaurants in Vegas and on cruise ships, and like, why do you keep doing this stuff? Why don't you just go away? And, Emerald said, he has alimony he has to pay for all of his children. But on top of that, the idea of feeding the beast, right? That this concept of this organization that he has built, the people he is now beholden to, right? Because their livelihoods and their careers are built off of this concept, this idea of what Emerald built. And so many people would say, oh man, I wish that I could be like Emerald. Everybody knows who he is. Bam, right? He's on TV shows and HSN, Trisha, right? And he's on the Food Network, and he's, fame and fortune and all of these things. But in that same moment, he can't walk away. He's become a prisoner to this thing that has been built because he has to feed the beast every single day. And so it's very interesting for us to look at what other people have and say, oh, I want that, or I will be happy when that happens. But we might not always really understand what that currency exchange is in order to get that thing that you want. And so again, if you do not define what enough means for you, really rooted in understanding the things that make you tick, the things that give you fulfillment, you might find yourself caught up in the consumerism, right? There's a big government that wants you, here, let me put my aluminum, hat on. I'm just kidding. But there is a government that needs you to own a house. Property taxes, local government, right? They have a concept in municipal government. It is called heads in beds. The more heads that they have in beds, the more property taxes they have. The more property taxes they have, the more funding that they have, which is an understanding, so that's why home ownership is so important. You take that to consumerism, right? We remember during COVID, people were fearful that if everybody, right, that concept of why can't the entire population just stay home for 3 weeks? Because if they could stay home for 3 weeks and isolate, then we could kill COVID in just 3 weeks. And you heard many people on Wall Street, you heard many people from the government, you heard many people go, the entire economy will collapse if everybody stopped spending money for just 3 weeks. You saw the cash flow happen to restaurants, right? In terms of cash on hand was very limited. Most restaurants have enough cash to carry themselves for about 10 days. If they have to be closed for longer than 10 days, they immediately go into the red. So here is an understanding of, and I'm not knocking it, clearly, many of us benefit from capitalism. All of us benefit from capitalism if you're in America, whether you like it or not. But understanding that there is this element of going, if I have not defined what was important to me, then someone else is going to define it for me. And that is one of the things when we talk about complacency. So again, that level of suffering of, I'm either depressed from where I am because of the choices that I've made and I want a better life than what I have. I'm disgusted by the life that I have. That's depression, living in the past, right? If I'm fearful that I'm going to lose it all, that's anxiety. That's my fear of the future. And so that is complacency, this idea of being restrained. If any of you are like us, I can't sleep with my feet constricted. That's that feeling, that inside turmoil of complacency, of not being happy with where you are. And so really getting rooted in understanding and defining this present moment, what it means for you. What are the things that you have defined can really make a life-altering change? And again, I'm not saying that you now go, I don't care, I don't have goals, I'm not aspiring for anything, right? That's the opposite of what I'm saying. But aspiration in the idea of, I want to see my potential realized, I want to strive for excellence, I am going to have high intention, low attachment. A lot of these topics that we've talked about in episodes past, that is one aspect. But the accumulation of things, the check marking of, moving from one checkpoint to the next for more and more and more, right? I coach people. It's wonderful. You hit $1 million in income. Congratulations. What's next? Well, I got to do 2 million. Why? Who told you? Well, we got to keep growing, right? Again, it is that sermon of more that is being preached over and over and over again, that it doesn't matter, you'll figure it out later. It's much better to have more than to not have enough, right? So really understanding and defining that. I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts? What's resonating with you? What about this conversation is maybe a new concept for you, something that you'd like to take with you and incorporate into things? I'm just curious. Of course, there are some people that are on here that are going, I'm nowhere near enough. I have debt and I'm not making enough money and I want my business to be way bigger than it is. Okay, wonderful. That's an understanding. What is the currency exchange that you're willing to make in order to achieve those goals? And once you've identified what enough is and you hit that point, then what happens? When do you rest, right? So let's go ahead and see what are some of the comments that are here. Roger, good morning from Delaware. I'm glad that it's beautiful there and not too gloomy. Let's see. J9 said, I just bought my plane ticket. Here I come. Awesome. Roger said, I also have stuff. However, that stuff is stuff that doesn't move. And he said, so me forward and the life I want with less stuff, right? And now, this is not just talking about minimalism. This is not just saying purge all of your things and not having an attachment, but it is interesting, in my close circle, people that are close to us, we've had to have discussions. There are many people that identify themselves with their belongings, right? Not necessarily saying that they're, clinically identified as a hoarder, but saying that many people have their identity attached to belongings or stuff, right? That is absolutely an element. We have people where their identity is attached to their work, right? That idea of being a workaholic is also, again, kind of going back to that example that I had of the guy who, just puts himself completely into work, hoping that it fills a void, convincing himself that he's doing it for his family. But what he's actually doing it for is because he only feels worthy when he is working. He only feels like he is contributing or that he has purpose when he is working. And part of that is not sitting with himself long enough to identify what is my purpose and what does fulfill me and what is enough for me, right? A lot of us, I've said it before, there's about 10,000 digital ads that we each see every single day, right? Each one of us move through between our phones and the TV and the billboards and the radio and everything. We run through about 10,000 digital ad placements per day. That's a lot of other people talking to you. How much time are you talking to you? How much time are you listening to that inner voice versus the voices of everybody else? And a lot of people need music on, or they need the TV on, or they need some kind of background noise as a distraction because either A, they don't like what the conversation is with themselves, or they've not practiced being able to sit still enough to listen to that voice. And so understanding that enough is also understanding that you are enough. For the people who seek enough out of, a partner, when I am in a relationship, then I will be enough. When I have 5 children, then I will be enough. When I have a great group of friends, then that will be enough. But understanding that you are enough and understanding that the things that are around you, if you sit with yourself and you identify what is enough for you, that is a very powerful place to come from. For those of you that are seeking excellence in your business, when you come from that place that you know that you are enough and that the work that you're doing is enough and that you are rooted in gratitude, you're a scary thing to a lot of people because you don't need them. You're not dependent upon them. You don't need to be on the hamster wheel of buying the next thing, doing the next thing. Oh, you paid off your phone. Now is time for an upgrade, right? There's a lot of these things going on. And if you want the new phone, fantastic. In 6 months, there will be a new one. But really identifying and asking yourself, do I want this? Or am I being told that I want this? Whether that is career, whether that is a certain kind of relationship or lifestyle, or consumerism, or house, or dream, or life, right? Making sure that you're living the life that you want, not necessarily the life that your parents wanted, or that society tells you that you're supposed to do, right? I hope that this resonates with you. Again, I would love to hear some ahas or some feedback from you around this and really how you want to take this conversation. Again, I've done kind of my meditation, my marination on this topic, but I'm curious if this is speaking to you, if this is valuable for you, if this is something that you're going to take into your week, or if we completely miss the mark. Go ahead and put some comments down for me. Let's see, Tricia said, I need to revisit what I build in your Life by Design Summit to remind myself of what truly is most important. Absolutely, Tricia, I think that's a wonderful idea. I was just having a conversation with Jack Smith. Congratulations to Jack and his team. In 8 months, they have surpassed that millionaire real estate agent status, which means that as a team, they have grossed more than $1 million in income in 8 months. And I had a conversation with them. I said, I would love to know as the team members, what have you done with $1 million+, right? What lives have you changed? What trips have you taken? What experiences have you gone on? How have you used that money to live a life of intention versus just an accumulation of checking the box that we've hit over $1 million? So really going back and going, why am I doing what I'm doing? And making sure that those things are in alignment. You're absolutely right. Isaiah said, I'm not where I want to be in terms of stuff, but I will get there by putting in the work. I think for me, it's changing from chasing the stuff to adding people and experiences, chasing personal growth and peace within. I love that, Isaiah. That is a wonderful observation. J9 said, I honestly have enough, and I often struggle with, I know I can do more, but I really have enough. Then I feel bored. And that's absolutely correct. And so, when you're in that place, where are the things that give you fulfillment outside of work? Do you have hobbies? Do you have certain things? I joke, but I'm not really joking, that there are some people in which being a real estate agent is their personality. It's not deeper than that, right? The puddle's pretty thin. So what are your hobbies? What are the things that you like to do? What are the things that you always told yourself that you wanted to get involved with? Did you want to learn how to golf? Do you want to make pottery? Do you want to go and volunteer? What are some of those things that bring you joy or bring you excitement? Again, we live in a society that, like, if you aren't monetizing everything, oh, you've got 4 hours this evening, you should start a side hustle. Everything needs to be monetized, and if you're not monetizing, somehow you're failing at life. Again, that narrative of the more is the only answer. It's, what are the hobbies that you have? Who are the people you want to spend time with? What are the concerts you want to go and enjoy? And go and do that, reminding us that the purpose of business is to fund the life by design. And the life by design element is to go live that life by design, right? So really understanding, and I love this, Kelly. She says, I'm enjoying the view from where I am. I've learned all the changes, and I have my health. Yes, I have evolved, and it's okay where I am. Yes, I am not in a need mode anymore. Need versus want is a totally different feeling. You're absolutely right, Kelly. Wonderful. Well, everybody, I hope that you have a wonderful morning. I hope that this brought value to you in some way. If this message spoke to you, it was meant for you. If it didn't, keep on keeping on. But I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and I will see you next Tuesday for another episode of Conscious Conversations. Bye, everybody.